I studied the map spread across the mahogany table, immediately spotting the problem. The coordinates Lightfoot had marked didn't match any survey I'd seen in 23 years of Arctic exploration. "This region doesn't exist," I said, looking up at the man who'd flown me to his Montana ranch on a private jet 3 hours ago. Lightfoot smiled slightly, the expression never reaching his dark eyes. "The official surveys are incomplete, Mr. Kane. I have better information." I'd built my reputation on knowing the Arctic better than anyone alive. From Svalbard to Ellesmere Island, I'd mapped ice flows, guided research teams through impossible conditions, and rescued idiots who thought expensive gear made them explorers. This man was suggesting I knew nothing about a significant portion of Greenland's ice sheet. Better information than NASA, than the Danish Polar Center? I folded my arms. What exactly are we looking for that's worth all this secrecy? Lightfoot walked to a sideboard where a crystal decanter caught the firelight. His silver hair seemed too perfect, too deliberately styled for a man planning an Arctic expedition. Everything about him felt calculated, from his casual but expensive clothing to the way he'd arranged this meeting at his isolated ranch. "Something extraordinary," he said, pouring 2 glasses. "Something beneath the ice that will change how we understand our world." "That's not an answer," I said, refusing the offered drink with a small shake of my head. "Minerals? Archaeological finds? I need specifics to plan properly. You need to know how to get us there safely, how to keep us alive. That's what I'm paying you for." Lightfoot set my rejected glass down and sipped from his own. The specifics of our objective remain my concern. The money he'd offered was obscene, enough to fund my cabin in Alaska for a decade. But the warning bells in my head kept getting louder. 20 years ago, I might have taken the job without question, but experience had taught me that secrets in the Arctic usually meant someone was going to die. "We'll need at least 8 support staff," I said, testing him. 2 mechanics, a doctor, communications specialist. "Already arranged," Lightfoot cut in. "Team of 6, all with Arctic experience. You'll meet them at the staging point in Nuuk." I raised an eyebrow. "You hired a team before you hired the expedition leader?" "I knew you'd take the job, Mr. Kane." His certainty irritated me. "The contract is for 3 weeks on the ice. We depart in 7 days." 7 days was insane for preparation, but not impossible if his team really was experienced. I studied him, trying to read past the polished exterior. Lightfoot had made billions in tech before disappearing from public view 5 years ago. The gossip sites speculated about everything from terminal illness to alien abduction. Whatever his secret project was, it clearly related to his vanishing act. "There's one more thing," Lightfoot said, setting his glass down carefully. "My daughter will be joining us." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Your what?" "My daughter, Eva. She's 9. I laughed, then realized he wasn't joking. "No, absolutely not. This isn't a family vacation, Mr. Lightfoot. We're talking about one of the most hostile environments on Earth." "She's coming," he said firmly. "Non-negotiable." "Then this conversation is over." I stood up, already calculating how quickly I could get to the nearest town from this isolated ranch. No responsible expedition leader would allow a child on an Arctic journey, especially to an unmapped region. Lightfoot didn't seem surprised by my reaction. He walked to his desk and retrieved a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. "Eva's medical records, training certificates. She's been preparing for this trip for 2 years." "Preparing?" I opened the folder reluctantly. Inside were photos of a small, solemn-faced girl with dark eyes practicing ice climbing, cold water immersion training, and first aid. Medical reports showed a battery of tests and vaccinations. "You've been planning this that long?" "Longer," Lightfoot said quietly. "This expedition is happening, Mr. Kane, with or without you." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. There was an edge of desperation there, carefully concealed but unmistakable to someone who'd heard it before, the sound of a person who would do anything to reach their goal. "Why?" I asked. What's so important that you'd risk your daughter's life? For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me. Something flickered behind his eyes. Grief, perhaps, or fear. Then the mask slipped back into place. You come highly recommended, Kane. You've never lost anyone under your leadership. That's why I need you. He tapped the folder. I love my daughter more than anything in this world. I wouldn't bring her if it wasn't essential. Essential for what? He ignored the question. Your fee has been doubled. Half deposited today, half upon our return. He slid a contract across the table. Do we have an agreement? I should have walked away. Every instinct built over decades in the most dangerous places on Earth told me this job was wrong. But as I looked down at the contract, I calculated what that money would mean. My sister's medical bills in Seattle, the repairs my boat needed, the freedom to choose only the jobs I wanted for years to come. And beneath the practical considerations was something else. Curiosity. What could possibly be so important in an unknown region of Greenland that this billionaire would prepare for years and risk his own child? I want full authority over safety decisions, I said finally. If conditions become dangerous, we turn back. No arguments. Of course, Lightfoot agreed too quickly. And I meet Eva and assess her myself before we leave. If I don't think she can handle it. You will. His confidence was unnerving. I took a deep breath and signed the contract, feeling like I'd just made a terrible mistake. Welcome aboard, Mr. Kane. Lightfoot extended his hand. I promise you won't regret this. His hand was cool and dry in mine, his grip perfect, not too strong, not too weak. Everything about this man was controlled, precise. Everything except the look in his eyes when he spoke about what lay beneath the ice. As I left his study to be shown to my guest room for the night, I glanced back and saw him standing at the window, staring out at the mountains. His reflection in the glass showed something I hadn't seen during our conversation, raw, naked fear. What was waiting for us in Greenland? What could make a man like Lightfoot afraid? I didn't know, but I'd just agreed to find out. The guest room was luxurious in a way that seemed designed to impress without revealing anything about its owner. I set my bag down and pulled out my satellite phone to call my contact at the Greenland Survey office. If anyone could tell me about unmapped regions, it would be Lars. He answered on the fourth ring, voice gruff from sleep. I apologized for the hour and explained I needed information on potential gaps in the coastal mapping of northeastern Greenland. Gaps? Lars laughed. Marcus, that coast has been mapped down to the meter. What are you really asking? I described the rough coordinates Lightfoot had shown me, careful not to give specifics. Lars went quiet for so long, I thought we'd lost connection. Why are you asking about this? He finally said. Just a potential job. Is there something unusual there? There's nothing there at all according to every survey, Lars said. But he hesitated. There have been anomalies in that region. Equipment failures, compass variations. One research team reported unusual ice formations before their communications went dark for 3 days. What happened to them? I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air temperature. They were found 70 miles from their last reported position with no memory of how they got there. Extreme hypothermia, disorientation. His voice dropped. The Danish government classified the incident. Officially, it was equipment failure and human error. And unofficially? Unofficially, no one goes to that part of the ice sheet anymore, not even the local guides. Lars cleared his throat. Whatever job you're considering, Marcus, I'd think twice. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, turning my satellite phone over in my hands. I could call Lightfoot right now, tell him I changed my mind. The deposit probably hadn't even cleared yet. Instead, I found myself walking down the hallway toward the sound of voices. I stopped outside a half-open door when I heard a child speak. Will it help me get better, Daddy? The girl's voice was soft but clear. Yes, sweetheart. This trip will fix everything, I promise. Lightfoot's voice had transformed completely. gentle, loving, with none of the cold precision he'd shown me. The doctors said, "The doctors don't understand what we're dealing with, but I do. I found the answer, Eva. Just trust me a little longer." I backed away silently, pieces falling into place. This wasn't about research or discovery or whatever Lightfoot had hinted at. This was about the girl. Something was wrong with her, something conventional medicine couldn't fix, and Lightfoot believed the answer lay beneath the Greenland ice. The next morning, I met Ava over breakfast. She was small for 9, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and the same penetrating eyes as her father. But where his were calculating, hers seemed to look right through you, as if seeing things others couldn't. "You're Mr. Kane," she said, examining me carefully. "Daddy says you're going to keep us safe on the ice." "That's my job," I said, watching how she handled her utensils. Her movements were precise, practiced, but I noticed a slight tremor in her right hand. "Have you seen polar bears?" she asked, cutting her pancakes into perfect squares. "Several, from a distance preferably." "I've read about them. They can smell seals through 3 feet of ice and snow." She recited this fact without looking up. "Their fur isn't actually white, it's transparent." "That's right," I said, surprised. "The hollow hairs scatter light, which makes them look white." She nodded, pleased I'd confirmed her knowledge. "I've been studying. Daddy says I need to know everything about where we're going." Lightfoot entered then, already dressed in expensive outdoor gear that looked brand new. "Ava has become quite the Arctic expert," he said proudly. "She could probably teach your orientation sessions." I looked between them, noting how Eva straightened when her father entered, her hands suddenly still. "Has she done any actual cold weather training beyond what was in the file?" "Immersion training in Montana and Alaska," Lightfoot answered. "Cold chamber exposure, winter camping in 6 feet of snow last January." Eva nodded earnestly. "I can set up a tent by myself, and I know the early signs of frostbite and hypothermia." "She's better prepared than some professional guides I've worked with," Lightfoot added. I addressed Eva directly. "Why do you want to go to Greenland?" She glanced at her father before answering. "It's important, for both of us. Aren't you scared?" She considered this seriously. "Sometimes, but Daddy says what we'll find there is worth being scared." Lightfoot placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "I think that's enough questioning, Mr. Kane. You'll find my daughter is more than capable." I spent the next week at Lightfoot's ranch, reviewing equipment lists, studying the limited maps he provided, and observing Eva whenever possible. She was indeed well trained. I watched her set up an Arctic tent in under 5 minutes and correctly prioritize survival gear from a randomized pile. But something was off. I caught her having what looked like small seizures when she thought no one was watching, moments where she would freeze completely, her eyes unfocused, before returning to normal as if nothing had happened. The night before our departure, I confronted Lightfoot in his study. "What's wrong with Eva?" I asked bluntly. He looked up from his computer, face hardening. "I don't know what you mean. I've seen the episodes, the tremors. Something's not right with her, and I think that's what this expedition is really about." For a long moment, I thought he would deny it or fire me on the spot. Instead, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. 3 years ago, Eva began experiencing what doctors called absence seizures. Brief moments where she would seem to check out. His voice was flat, clinical. They progressed to more complex events, periods where she would speak languages she'd never learned, describe places she'd never been. I kept my face neutral, waiting. The neurologists found abnormal brain activity but no tumor, no physical cause they could treat. Lightfoot's perfect composure slipped slightly. They wanted to try experimental medications that would basically put her in a chemical straitjacket. "And instead of medical treatment, you decided an Arctic expedition was the answer?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw raw emotion there. "I found another explanation, another possibility. He opened a drawer and removed an old leather journal, sliding it across the desk. "Read this tonight, then decide if you're still willing to lead us." The journal belonged to a Danish explorer named Pedersen, who'd ventured to northeastern Greenland in the 1880s. Most of it documented standard expedition notes, weather, ice conditions, supply calculations. But the final entries described finding something impossible beneath the ice, a structure not made by human hands, with symbols that matched exactly the strange markings Ava had begun drawing during her episodes. According to Peterson, his team had fled after several members experienced a sickness of the mind near the structure. His final entry suggested the site had some kind of healing property that had cured his frostbitten hand, restored as if the injury had never occurred. I closed the journal, unsure what to think. Either Lightfoot had fabricated an elaborate hoax, or he genuinely believed this journal held the key to helping his daughter. Either way, we were headed into dangerous territory, geographically and otherwise. The next morning, we flew to Nuuk on Lightfoot's private jet. Eva sat quietly reading an Arctic wildlife guide, occasionally showing me pictures of birds and asking if I'd seen them. I found myself warming to her despite my reservations about the trip. "Have you been to Greenland before?" I asked her. She nodded. "Twice, but not where we're going this time." She lowered her voice. "Daddy says it's special, that it will help fix what's wrong with me." "Do you feel like something's wrong with you?" She considered this with surprising maturity. "I lose time. Sometimes I say things I don't remember. It scares the other kids at school." She looked out the window at the clouds below. "Daddy's tried everything to help me. If he says the answer is in Greenland, then that's where it is." Her complete faith in her father was both touching and concerning. I wondered what would happen to that faith if we reached our destination and found nothing but ice. In Nuuk, we met the rest of the team, 6 professionals with solid credentials, though none had worked in the specific region we were targeting. They deferred to me immediately on technical matters, which was a good sign. Our equipment was already staged, top-of-the-line gear that made even my experienced eyes widen. Lightfoot had spared no expense. Whatever we were seeking beneath the ice, he was deadly serious about finding it. As I supervised the loading of our specialized ice vehicles, Ava appeared at my side, watching intently. "Mr. Kane, what if we don't find it?" she asked quietly. "Find what?" "The thing that will fix me." I looked down at her solemn face and found I couldn't lie. "Then we'll come back and try something else." She nodded thoughtfully. "Daddy won't give up. He never does." Her eyes met mine. "Will you give up on me too, if it doesn't work?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm not here to fix you, Ava. I'm here to keep you safe." "That's what the doctors always say before they give up," she replied with a weariness no 9-year-old should possess. Then she wandered off to examine a stack of supply crates, leaving me with the uncomfortable feeling that I'd somehow failed a test. The evening before departure, I made one final check of our route and equipment. Everything was in order, at least on the surface, but as I looked at the map with Lightfoot's marked destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading somewhere no one was meant to go. Having second thoughts, Lightfoot appeared beside me, his breath fogging in the cold Nuuk air. "Just being thorough," I said. He studied me for a moment. "You read Pedersen's journal." I did. And I think you're chasing a fantasy because you can't accept your daughter's medical condition." I met his gaze directly. "But I also think you'd go without me and get yourself killed, so I'm still in." He smiled slightly. "Your concern is noted, Kane, but unnecessary." He looked out at the harbor where our final supplies were being loaded. "By this time next week, you'll understand. Everyone will." "What happens if we don't find your miracle cure?" I asked. His smile vanished. "That's not an option." As he walked away, I realized what bothered me most wasn't his secrecy or even the danger of the expedition. It was the absolute certainty with which he spoke. a certainty that brooked no possibility of failure or error. In my experience, people that convinced of their own rightness were the most dangerous of all. That night, I called my sister from my hotel room, telling her I'd be out of contact for about 3 weeks. I didn't share my misgivings about the expedition, no point worrying her, but I updated my will before turning in, just in case. As I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about Eva. Whatever was happening with her, she deserved better than being dragged to one of the most inhospitable places on Earth on the strength of a century-old explorer's ravings. But Lightfoot would proceed with or without me, and at least with me, she'd have someone looking out for her safety first. Tomorrow, we would head into the ice, seeking something that probably didn't exist. I'd seen many men destroyed by obsession in my years in the Arctic, driven to madness or death by their conviction that some great discovery awaited them. I'd sworn never to become one of them. Yet here I was, preparing to lead an expedition based on nothing more than a desperate father's hope and a questionable historical account. For Eva's sake, I hoped we found nothing at all. We could return to civilization, and Lightfoot could seek proper treatment for his daughter. But as I drifted toward sleep, I couldn't shake the memory of Eva's eyes, ancient and knowing in her young face, and the strange certainty in her voice when she said her father would find what he was looking for. The ice vehicles moved with mechanical precision across the glacial landscape, our convoy snaking through white terrain that should have looked familiar. Dawn broke over the horizon as we completed our second day of travel from Nuuk, casting pale light across the frozen expanse. But something was wrong, deeply wrong. I checked the GPS coordinates again, comparing them to the position displayed on our navigation system. According to every instrument, we were exactly where we were supposed to be, 40 miles inland on Greenland's northeastern ice sheet. But this wasn't any part of Greenland I recognized, despite having traversed these regions for over 2 decades. "Everything all right, Kane?" Dr. Haswell, our team physician, asked from the passenger seat beside me. "Fine," I lied, not wanting to alarm the others yet. I tapped the communication system. "Base team, this is lead vehicle. We'll stop here to establish camp." The 3 modified snow trucks lurched to a halt, their massive treads crunching into the packed snow. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my exposed cheeks despite the protective gear. The temperature read -20, standard for this time of year. But the light felt wrong, diffuse and hazy, as if filtering through something that wasn't quite atmosphere. Lightfoot emerged from the second vehicle, helping Eva down with careful attention. The girl wore a custom-made Arctic suit that probably cost more than most explorers' entire gear collections. Her eyes darted around, taking in the vast emptiness with that unnervingly adult gaze. "We've made good time," Lightfoot said, coming to stand beside me. "Better than your initial estimates." I nodded absently, my attention caught by the ice formations to our east. They rose like towers, twisting in ways that defied natural ice flow patterns. In 23 years of Arctic exploration, I'd never seen anything like them. "Those formations," I said, pointing. "Have you seen them in your research?" Lightfoot followed my gaze, his expression unreadable behind his goggles. "Yes, they're exactly as described in the historical accounts." The rest of the team busied themselves setting up our first major camp. These were professionals who knew their jobs. Carver and Zhang unloading the scientific equipment, Rodriguez and Peterson establishing the communications array, Williams organizing the supply distribution while Haswell prepared the medical station. They worked with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before, though I knew from their files none had been to this specific region. I walked a few yards from the vehicles, needing space to think. The ice beneath my boots felt strange, not quite solid in the way Arctic ice should be. It had an almost imperceptible give to it, like walking on something organic rather than frozen water. Eva appeared at my side, startling me. She moved silently despite the bulky cold weather gear. "The stars were wrong last night," she said matter-of-factly. I looked down at her. "What do you mean?"
"They weren't in the right places. I've been studying astronomy with my tutor.
The constellations were all wrong. She pointed upward at the pale morning sky. And there was a star that shouldn't be there, a blue one, really bright. Her observation sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I'd noticed it too, but had been trying to rationalize it. Atmospheric distortion, unusual aurora activity, anything but the truth. That the night sky over this part of Greenland didn't match any celestial map on Earth. "Did you tell your father?" I asked. She nodded. "He said it was because we're in a special place, that the normal rules don't apply here." I frowned. Lightfoot was feeding her mystical nonsense instead of addressing the genuine wrongness of our situation. "Ava!" Lightfoot called from where the team was erecting the main habitat dome. "Come help with your tent." She gave me a small smile before trotting back to her father. I watched her go, noting how the ice seemed to ripple subtly in her wake, an optical illusion, surely. As the day progressed and camp took shape, I found myself cataloging the abnormalities. The sun moved at an angle slightly off from what it should be at this latitude. The horizon line seemed too sharp, too defined. Radio communications with Nook came through with a delay that couldn't be explained by distance alone. By evening, the habitat structures were secured, 3 connected domes for sleeping and working, plus smaller shelters for equipment and supplies. The team gathered in the central dome for a hot meal, spirits still high despite the grueling journey. Only I seemed to notice how the shadows fell at incorrect angles, how the air inside the heated dome held an underlying chill that no thermal system could dispel. "You've been quiet, Kane," Haswell said as she sat next to me with a steaming mug of coffee. "Something on your mind?" I considered telling her what I'd observed, but held back. Without concrete evidence, I'd sound paranoid. "Just getting my bearings," I said instead. "This region has some unusual features." "You've never been to this exact spot before?" "No one has," I said more sharply than I intended. At least, no one in the modern era. After dinner, I stepped outside to check the perimeter systems. Night had fallen completely now, revealing the star field I'd been dreading seeing again. I stood frozen, staring upward at a cosmic arrangement that was fundamentally wrong. The Big Dipper, which should have been clearly visible, was distorted. Its stars stretched and realigned into an unfamiliar pattern. Polaris was not in its fixed position, and dominating the northern sky was a star I'd never seen before, massive and pulsing with a blue-violet light that seemed to throb like a heartbeat. I fumbled for the digital camera in my pocket, needing evidence of what I was seeing. But when I reviewed the image, it showed only normal stars, none of the wrongness visible to my naked eye. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lightfoot's voice came from behind me. The ancients called it Ularu, the eye of the cat. I turned to face him. "What is this place? These aren't the stars we should be seeing." "They're the stars as they truly are," he said calmly, without the filter of human perception. "That's not an answer." Lightfoot gestured toward the vast ice field surrounding us. "This region exists at what you might call a thin point between worlds. The Danish explorer Pedersen discovered it by accident in the 1880s. The indigenous people had legends about it going back thousands of years." "That's impossible," I said, though the evidence to the contrary was literally written in the stars above us. "Is it?" He smiled slightly. "You've worked in extreme environments your entire career, Kane. Have you never encountered places that seemed different, where compass needles spin or electronics fail for no reason, where time feels stretched or compressed?" I had. Places I'd avoided discussing in reports or with other explorers for fear of sounding insane. Spots in the deep Arctic where I'd experienced missing hours, where directions seemed to shift, where I'd felt watched by something ancient and vast. "What does this have to do with Ava?" I asked, refocusing on what mattered. Lightfoot's expression softened. "Everything. Her condition isn't medical, it's dimensional. She's sensitive to the thinning between worlds, What doctors call seizures are actually moments when she's perceiving reality as it truly exists. He looked back toward the habitat where his daughter was presumably sleeping. I'm not crazy, Kane. I've spent years researching this, consulting with physicists, anthropologists, occultists, anyone who might understand what's happening to her. I wanted to dismiss him as delusional, but the impossible stars above us made that difficult. And you think bringing her here will help? I know it will. The ancient structure beneath the ice will stabilize her perception, allow her to control it rather than being controlled by it. Before I could respond, a sound caught my attention, a soft padding in the snow nearby. I turned, scanning the darkness beyond our camp lights. Something small and dark moved between two equipment crates. Did you see that? I asked, already moving toward it. See what? Lightfoot followed my gaze. I approached the crates cautiously, hand moving to the pistol at my hip. Standard equipment for polar bear protection. What I found instead left me speechless. A black cat sat calmly between the crates, its yellow eyes reflecting our camp lights. Its fur was sleek and unmarked by frost, despite the killing cold that should have frozen any unprotected mammal within minutes. That's impossible, I breathed. Lightfoot seemed less surprised. Interesting. I didn't expect manifestations this soon. You know what this is? I demanded. A sign we're in the right place. He reached toward the cat, which hissed and backed away. Don't attempt to touch it. The cat darted past us, heading directly toward the habitat dome where Eva slept. I followed, disturbed by its presence and its apparent destination. By the time I reached the habitat entrance, the animal had vanished. Inside, I found Eva awake in her small private section, sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag. She looked up as I entered, her face eerily calm. Did you see the cat? I asked. She nodded. It wants something from me. What does it want? I don't know yet. She tilted her head slightly. But it's been following me since we left Nuuk. It was on the boat and in the trucks, but no one else saw it. A chill ran through me. Why didn't you say anything? Daddy said I would see things others couldn't when we got close to the special place. She looked down at her hands. Is it real, Mr. Kane? I hesitated, caught between truth and comfort. I saw it too, just now. Her eyes widened slightly. Then you're special too. I left Eva to sleep, my mind racing. Outside, I found Lightfoot waiting expectantly. She's seen it before, I told him. Says it's been following her since Nuuk. He nodded as if this confirmed something. Her connection is strengthening as we get closer. Connection to what? Instead of answering, he pointed to the ice beneath our feet. Tomorrow, we begin drilling core samples. The structure is approximately 300 feet below us. I stared at the innocent-looking snow, trying to comprehend the idea of some ancient building buried deep below. And if there's nothing there? There is. His certainty was absolute. You'll see. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wrongly positioned stars, the black cat with its unblinking yellow eyes, Eva's too calm face as she spoke of being followed. Something fundamental about our reality had shifted since entering this region, and I couldn't shake the feeling we had crossed a boundary never meant to be crossed. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and decided to check the perimeter sensors. The habitat was quiet, the team sleeping soundly after our exhausting journey. I pulled on my cold weather gear and stepped outside. The night had grown even stranger. The air shimmered with faint purple-blue light that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. The impossible star, Ularu, as Lightfoot had called it, pulsed overhead like a beacon. The silence was absolute in a way that defied natural explanation. No wind, no creaking ice, no distant calving glaciers. I walked the camp perimeter, checking each sensor station. All readings were normal, yet nothing about this place felt normal. The ice fields stretched endlessly in all directions. but distances seemed distorted, as if certain points were simultaneously farther and closer than they appeared. Near the eastern edge of our camp, I spotted unusual tracks in the snow, not the distinctive paw prints of a cat, but something larger, with an uneven gait that suggested it moved on more than 4 legs. I followed them for about 20 yards before they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had vanished mid-stride. I knelt to examine the last print more closely. It had melted slightly and refrozen, creating a glass-like depression that caught the strange ambient light. As I watched, the ice within the print seemed to shift and swirl, showing glimpses of something moving deep below, shapes that made no anatomical sense, geometries that hurt my eyes to focus on. I jerked my hand back, heart pounding. This was beyond unusual weather patterns or geographical anomalies. This was something else entirely, something I lacked the vocabulary to even describe. A soft mewling sound made me turn. The black cat sat watching me from atop a supply crate, its tail curled neatly around its feet. In the unearthly light, its eyes appeared to contain pinpoint stars, miniature reflections of the wrong constellations above. "What are you?" I whispered. The cat blinked slowly, then turned its head toward Eva's sleeping quarters. My protective instincts flared. I moved toward the animal, determined to drive it away from her, but it vanished again, not running or hiding, but simply ceasing to be there between one blink and the next. I returned to the habitat, checking Eva's sleeping area. She lay peacefully in her thermal sleeping bag, her breathing even. But on the floor beside her bed were small, wet paw prints that glistened with that same purple-blue luminescence I'd seen outside. The next morning, the team prepared to begin their scientific survey. Equipment was unpacked, testing sites marked, and everyone seemed eager to start work. No one but me appeared to notice how the shadows fell at incorrect angles or how compass needles wavered and spun when pointed in certain directions. Ava stayed close to her father as the drilling equipment was assembled. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but showed no signs of the seizures Lightfoot had described. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked her while Lightfoot was busy consulting with Jang about the drilling specifications. "The cat sat on my chest all night," she said matter-of-factly. "It was heavy." I glanced at her small sleeping bag, remembering the wet paw prints. "Did it hurt you?" She shook her head. It was telling me things about what's under the ice. "What things?" "That it's been waiting for us." She looked up at me with those unnervingly adult eyes. For me, specifically. Before I could question her further, Lightfoot called her over to witness the first test drill. I watched her go, noticing how the strange ambient light seemed to cling to her, creating a subtle aura that no one else appeared to see. The day progressed with mounting strangeness. The first core samples revealed ice with impossible properties, layers that didn't match known climate patterns, embedded materials that Jang couldn't immediately identify, crystalline structures that formed patterns too regular to be natural. Lightfoot grew increasingly excited with each discovery, while I felt a growing dread. This wasn't just an unmapped region. It was something fundamentally not of our world. By mid-afternoon, Rodriguez reported that our communication system had failed completely. No signal could reach Nuuk or any satellite overhead. We were entirely cut off. "Could be magnetic interference," Williams suggested, though her expression showed she didn't believe it. "This region has unusual geomagnetic properties. Fix it," I ordered, knowing instinctively that external communication would be vital if things went wrong. If things continued going wrong. As the perpetual Arctic night began to fall again, I noticed the team's behavior subtly changing. Carver, normally talkative, had grown silent and kept looking over his shoulder at nothing. Peterson was meticulously arranging and rearranging her tools in patterns that made no practical sense. Zhang had been staring at the same ice core sample for over an hour, muttering calculations that he refused to share. Something about this place was affecting them already. Only Lightfoot seemed immune, his focus entirely on the drilling progress and his daughter. I pulled Haswell aside, trusting the doctor's scientific mind. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the team's behavior?" She hesitated. "Minor stress responses, not unexpected given the isolation and pressure. And the environment? Anything seem off to you?" She studied me carefully. "You're worried about something specific." I decided to test the waters. "The stars. Have you looked at them?" "Not closely. Why?" "They're in the wrong positions. Completely wrong." She frowned. "That's not possible. Look tonight. Really look, and tell me what you see." She agreed, though her expression suggested she was humoring me rather than taking my concerns seriously. As night fell completely, I found myself standing again under that impossible sky. The dominant star, Ularu, seemed larger than before, its pulsing light casting subtle shadows that moved independently of their sources. Haswell joined me outside, her breath fogging in the frigid air. She looked up, and I watched her face change. Confusion, disbelief, then the beginning of the same dread I'd been feeling. "Those aren't our stars," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "They're not." "How is this possible?" She looked to me as if I might have answers. "I don't know, but I think Lightfoot does." We stood in silence, both processing the implications of what we were seeing. The universe above us was not our universe, which meant, by extension, that perhaps the Greenland beneath our feet was not entirely our Greenland either. A movement caught my eye, the black cat walking with deliberate slowness along the top of our largest habitat dome. Its form seemed slightly larger than before, its proportions subtly wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Haswell followed my gaze. "Is that a cat? How could a cat be out here?" So she could see it too. That was somehow more disturbing than if I'd been the only one. "It's been following Eva," I said. "That's impossible. It would freeze to death in minutes out here." As if hearing us, the cat turned its head in our direction. Its eyes reflected the light of Ularu, glowing with the same pulsing blue-violet hue. Then it stretched, not in the normal way of cats arching their backs, but something else entirely. For just a moment, its form seemed to elongate impossibly, limbs extending and multiplying before snapping back to normal feline proportions. Haswell gasped. "What the hell was that?" Before I could answer, Eva emerged from the main habitat dome. She wore her full Arctic gear but had left her gloves behind. Her small, bare hands glowed faintly with the same light that emanated from the ice. "Ava," I called, moving toward her. "You shouldn't be out here without proper protection." She didn't seem to hear me. Her gaze was fixed on the cat, which had jumped down from the dome and now sat directly in her path. They stared at each other, girl and impossible animal, locked in some communion I couldn't understand. I reached Eva and grasped her shoulders, turning her away from the cat. Her skin felt unnaturally warm despite the killing cold. "Ava, look at me." Her eyes slowly focused on mine. "It's waking up, Mr. Kane. What's under the ice? It knows we're here." "Let's get you inside." I slammed the habitat door behind us, sealing out the impossible landscape that had replaced the Greenland we knew. Eva trembled against me despite the warmth of her Arctic gear, her small hands still emitting that faint purple-blue glow. "What's happening to her?" Haswell demanded, reaching for Eva's wrist to check her pulse. The main dome was empty, except for Williams, who sat at the communication station with her back to us, still trying to re-establish contact with Nuuk. The rest of the team must have been in the connected domes or outside managing the drilling equipment. "Ava, can you hear me?" I asked, kneeling to her eye level. She nodded slowly, her gaze unfocused. "They're talking to me, all at once. Too many voices." "Who's talking?" Haswell asked. "The cats, the ice, the star." Eva's voice sounded distant, as if part of her was somewhere else. "They've been waiting for so long, sleeping." Williams turned from her equipment, noticing us for the first time. "Is she okay?" She removed her headset, revealing dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there earlier in the day. "Get Lightfoot," I told her. "Now." As Williams hurried toward the equipment dome, I guided Eva to the small medical station Haswell had established in the corner. The girl moved mechanically, her body present but her mind clearly elsewhere. "I need to examine her," Haswell said, retrieving her kit. Eva sat passively as Haswell checked her vitals. Her temperature read 101.3, mild fever, but concerning in these conditions. Her pupils responded to light, but sluggishly, dilating and contracting at uneven rates. "Ava, do you know where you are?" Haswell asked, her voice calm and professional despite the strangeness surrounding us. "Between," Ava whispered, "in the threshold." "Between what, sweetheart?" I asked. Her eyes finally focused on me, and the lucidity in them was somehow more frightening than the emptiness before. "Between worlds, between stars, between sleep and waking." She tilted her head. "The cats are its eyes. It sees through them." "What is it?" I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic temperatures. Before she could answer, the habitat door burst open, and Lightfoot rushed in, followed by Williams. His face showed the first genuine fear I'd seen from him. "What happened?" he demanded, moving immediately to Eva's side. "She was outside, staring at that cat," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "She says something beneath the ice is waking up." Lightfoot took Eva's glowing hands in his. "Eva, sweetheart, can you hear me?" "Daddy," she said, recognition flickering across her features. "You were right. It's here, under the ice, waiting for me." His expression shifted from concern to something more complex, fear mingled with vindication. "I know, sweetheart. That's why we came." "I don't think you understand what it wants," she whispered. I interrupted, unable to contain my growing alarm. "Lightfoot, your daughter needs medical attention, not whatever this is. We should evacuate her back to Newark." "Impossible," Williams interjected. "Communications are still down, and there's something wrong with the navigation systems. The GPS is showing coordinates that make no sense." "We can't leave now," Lightfoot said, his voice hardening. "We're exactly where we need to be. Tomorrow, we'll reach the structure. Everything will be clear then." I stared at him incredulously. "Your daughter is ill. Whatever is happening to her is getting worse, not better." "This is part of the process," he insisted. Pedersen's journal described similar symptoms when his team approached the structure. "It's how the connection begins." "Connection to what?" Haswell demanded. Before Lightfoot could answer, Eva suddenly went rigid, her back arching unnaturally. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites as her limbs began to tremble. "She's seizing," Haswell said, quickly turning Eva onto her side. "No," Lightfoot countered. "This is different. This is what happens at home." Eva's mouth opened, and what emerged was not the voice of a 9-year-old girl. The sound was layered, as if multiple voices spoke in unison, the words flowing in a language I'd never heard, guttural and fluid at the same time, with phonetic combinations that should have been physically impossible for human vocal cords to produce. Williams backed away, making a small sound of fear. Even Haswell froze, her medical training momentarily forgotten as she listened to the impossible sounds emerging from Eva's throat. Lightfoot, however, leaned closer. "Yes," he whispered. "Tell me where." The foreign sounds continued for nearly a minute before Eva's body went limp. Her eyes closed, and her breathing returned to normal, though the faint glow persisted around her hands. "What just happened?" I demanded, turning to Lightfoot. "Confirmation," he said, standing up. "She's receiving communication, just like at home, but stronger here. Much stronger." "That wasn't communication," Haswell said, checking Eva's pulse again. "That was something taking control of her." "You don't understand," Lightfoot snapped. "This is why we came. The entity beneath the ice can heal her, permanently. The ancient civilization that built the structure understood how to navigate between dimensions. They knew what was happening to children like Eva." "Children like Eva," I repeated. "Throughout history, there have been cases. Children who see things others don't, who speak languages they've never learned, who draw symbols from civilizations they couldn't possibly know about. His voice grew passionate, almost feverish. Modern medicine calls it schizophrenia, temporal lobe epilepsy, dissociative disorder, but it's none of those things. They're perceiving reality as it truly exists, across dimensional boundaries. Williams and Haswell exchanged worried glances. I could see them questioning Lightfoot's sanity, just as I had been since discovering Pedersen's journal. But after what we'd witnessed outside, the transformed landscape, the impossible stars, the ice becoming transparent, his explanations seemed less delusional than they had back in Montana. "We need to move her to her sleeping area," Haswell said, breaking the tense silence. I helped carry Eva to her small private section of the habitat. She remained unconscious but peaceful, her breathing even. The glow around her hands had faded slightly. "I want to monitor her through the night," Haswell told Lightfoot. "I'm concerned about these episodes." He nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. "I'll stay with her." "No," I said firmly. "You need rest if you're going to lead the drilling team tomorrow. I'll take first watch." Lightfoot seemed about to argue, then nodded reluctantly. "Wake me if anything changes. Anything at all." After he left, Haswell lingered, checking Eva's temperature one more time. "Kane," she said quietly, "I'm not equipped for this. Whatever's happening to her is beyond my medical training." "Do what you can," I told her. "And Haswell, be careful. This place is affecting all of us." Left alone with Eva, I sat on a folding chair beside her sleeping mat, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Despite everything, she looked like an ordinary 9-year-old girl, small and vulnerable. I found myself wondering about her life before this expedition, whether she had friends at school, favorite books, toys she'd left behind. Normal childhood things that seemed a universe away from this habitat on ice that was no longer entirely of our world. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling around the dome in a way that sounded almost like voices, high, thin wails that formed patterns just beyond comprehension. The lights in the habitat flickered periodically, though our power systems should have been stable. I must have dozed off despite my best intentions. A soft sound woke me, a wet, slithering noise coming from just outside Eva's sleeping area. I checked my watch. I'd been asleep for just over 2 hours. Eva lay exactly as before, still unconscious. But something had changed. The air in the small compartment felt thick, almost gelatinous, as if it had taken on physical properties beyond normal atmosphere. And there was a smell, musky and wild, like wet fur and something else I couldn't identify. The slithering sound came again, followed by a soft thump against the outer wall of Eva's sleeping area. I rose quietly, one hand moving to the knife at my belt. We had firearms for polar bear protection, but they were stored in the equipment dome, too far to reach quickly. I slowly unzipped the partition that separated Eva's space from the main dome, peering through the narrow opening. The habitat was dark except for the emergency lighting that cast a soft blue glow across the equipment and sleeping forms of the team. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I saw it. A shadow moving differently from the others, something large and bulky making its way along the wall toward Ava's section. I slipped through the partition, closing it behind me to keep whatever it was away from Ava. In the dim light, the shape resolved into something that had once been a cat but was no longer anything so simple. The creature had grown, its body now the size of a large dog, but bizarrely distorted. Its limbs had elongated, bending at unnatural angles. The sleek fur had thinned in places, revealing skin that seemed to shift and pulse as if something moved beneath its surface. Its head remained recognizably feline, but the proportions were wrong, the jaw too large, the eyes too wide set. The transformed cat noticed me and turned, those yellow eyes now containing unmistakable constellations, miniature versions of the wrong stars we'd seen outside. It opened its mouth, revealing teeth that continually shifted and reformed, some human-like, others curved like needles. "Get away from her," I said quietly, not wanting to wake the others yet. The creature made a sound, not a meow or hiss, but something closer to laughter, a chuckling noise that bubbled up from a throat not designed for such sounds. It moved sideways, its body flowing rather than walking, leaving a faint trail of luminescence on the floor. I took a step toward it, knife raised. The creature responded by arching its back, its form stretching and distorting even further until it barely resembled a cat at all, more a collection of limbs and eyes arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. "Kane?" Zhang's voice came from his sleeping bag across the dome. "What's going on?" "Stay back," I warned, not taking my eyes off the creature. "Get Lightfoot." Zhang emerged from his sleeping bag, reaching for his glasses. When he saw the transformed cat, he made a small, choked sound. "What is that thing?" "Just get Lightfoot," I repeated, keeping myself between the creature and Eva's sleeping area. The creature's head rotated completely around, an impossible movement for a normal cat's anatomy, its gaze fixing on Zhang. The scientist froze, his face draining of color. Then, without warning, he began laughing, a high, unnatural sound completely at odds with the fear in his eyes. "Zhang?" I called, alarmed by his reaction. He continued laughing, tears streaming down his face, his body rigid. The creature seemed to feed on his response, growing slightly larger as Zhang's laughter grew more frantic and uncontrolled. The commotion woke the others. Rodriguez emerged from his sleeping area, followed by Carver. Both stopped short at the sight of the bloated, distorted cat thing and Zhang's hysterical laughter. "What the hell?" Carver whispered. The creature turned again, seemingly enjoying the audience. It rippled, its form becoming momentarily fluid before resolving into something even more grotesque, still cat-like in basic outline, but with multiple limbs sprouting from its torso and small secondary faces forming and dissolving along its flanks. "Get Lightfoot and Haswell," I told Rodriguez, who stood closest to the equipment dome where they were sleeping. As Rodriguez turned to go, Zhang's laughter abruptly stopped. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the creature, blood trickling from his nose. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the same layered quality Eva's had. "It rises. The Starborn rises." The creature made that chuckling sound again, its yellow eyes fixed on Zhang as if in approval. Then it turned its attention back to Eva's sleeping area, moving toward it with renewed purpose. I intercepted it, slashing with my knife. The blade connected, but passed through the creature as if through dense liquid, leaving a gash that leaked not blood, but a luminous purple-blue substance identical to what we'd seen in the ice. The wound closed almost immediately, the flesh knitting together before my eyes. The creature hissed, rearing back, its form distorted again, this time elongating vertically until it towered over me, a twisted column of fur and flesh and too many eyes. Then it lunged, not at me but past me, straight through the partition into Eva's sleeping area. I turned and followed, heart pounding. Inside, Eva remained unconscious on her sleeping mat, but her body was now suspended several inches above it, floating in midair. The creature stood beside her, its misshapen head lowered toward hers as if whispering in her ear. "Get away from her!" I lunged forward, grabbing for any part of the creature I could reach. My hands sank into its fur, encountering not solid flesh, but something cold and gelatinous beneath. The sensation was so repulsive I nearly let go, but concern for Eva overrode my disgust. I pulled with all my strength, trying to drag the thing away from her. The creature twisted in my grasp, turning to face me. This close, I could see that what I'd thought were stars in its eyes were actually tiny, squirming things, like minuscule versions of itself, swimming in yellow fluid. Its jaw unhinged, opening impossibly wide to reveal not a throat, but a swirling vortex of the same purple-blue light we'd seen in the ice. I heard shouting behind me. Lightfoot and Haswell had arrived. The creature made a sound like static electricity and suddenly collapsed in on itself, its form shrinking and compressing until it was once again the size of an ordinary cat. It slipped from my grasp, darted between Lightfoot's legs, and vanished into the shadows of the main dome. Eva remained suspended above her sleeping mat for a moment longer, then gently settled back down. Her eyes snapped open, but they were wrong. Completely black from edge to edge, with no whites or iris visible. She took a deep, gasping breath, her back arching painfully. "Eva!" Lightfoot rushed to her side. "Don't touch her," Haswell warned, pulling him back. "We don't know what's happening." Eva's body relaxed, and she blinked several times. When her eyes opened again, they were normal, but vacant, unseeing, though they remained wide open. Her mouth moved slightly, as if trying to form words, but no sound emerged. "Eva, can you hear me?" Lightfoot asked, his voice breaking. No response. Her eyes stared unblinkingly at the ceiling, her body completely still except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "She's catatonic," Haswell said, checking Eva's pupils with a penlight. The girl showed no reaction to the bright light. Complete dissociative state. "That thing did something to her," I said, still feeling the cold, gelatinous sensation on my hands where I'd touched the creature. "What was it?" Carver asked from the doorway, his face pale. "It was the cat," I said. "The black cat we've been seeing, but changed." "That wasn't a cat," Rodriguez said, crossing himself. "That was something else wearing a cat's skin." Jung stood behind them, swaying slightly. The blood from his nose had dried on his upper lip, and his eyes had a glazed, distant look. "The Starborn rises," he repeated in his normal voice. "It's coming through, using her as a door." Lightfoot whirled on him. "What did you say?" Jung blinked, seeming confused by his own words. I don't know why I said that." Haswell had begun a more thorough examination of Eva, checking her reflexes and vital signs. Her heart rate is elevated but steady. Breathing is shallow but regular. She lifted one of Eva's eyelids wider. No reaction to stimuli. Classic catatonia, but I've never seen an onset this sudden or complete. "We need to get her out of here," I said to Lightfoot. "Back to civilization. Whatever you think is happening, this place is hurting her, not helping." For the first time, Lightfoot seemed uncertain. He stared at his daughter's vacant face, genuine fear in his eyes. "This shouldn't be happening. Not like this. The connection should be helping her, not—" A commotion from the main dome interrupted him. Williams's voice, high with panic. "Peterson's gone." We rushed out to find Williams standing by the habitat entrance, clutching a parka. "She went outside. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She said she needed to see the stars." "When?" I demanded. "Just now, maybe 2 minutes ago." I grabbed my cold weather gear. "Lightfoot, stay with Eva. Haswell, keep monitoring her. Rodriguez, Carver, with me." "I'll come too," Jung volunteered, but his unsteady stance and distant expression made me shake my head. "Stay here. Help watch Eva." The three of us dressed quickly and headed out into the Arctic night. The transformed landscape I'd seen earlier had intensified, the bowl-like depression deeper, the strange ambient light stronger. The star Ularu pulsed overhead, its blue-violet light casting everything in an alien glow. "What the hell happened to the terrain?" Carver asked, stopping short just outside the habitat. "It wasn't like this before." "Keep moving," I said, scanning for any sign of Peterson. "And stay together." We found her about 100 yards from camp, standing at the edge of a large crack in the ice. She wore no gloves or head covering despite the killing cold, her hands hanging limply at her sides, frost already forming on her exposed skin. "Peterson," I called, approaching cautiously. She turned slowly. Her eyes held the same vacant look as Eva's, though she was clearly conscious and mobile. "Kane," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You should see this. It's beautiful." I followed her gaze down into the crack. The ice walls glowed with that same purple-blue light, growing brighter as the fissure descended. About 30 feet down, the narrow crack widened into a vast, open space, and suspended in that space, partially visible through layers of translucent ice, was something massive, a structure of some kind, all angles and arches that made no. The door sealed behind me with a sound like glaciers colliding, cutting off the howling Arctic wind in an instant. Darkness surrounded me, except for a faint purple-blue glow emanating from somewhere ahead. I blinked, waiting for my eyes to adjust while fighting the instinct to turn back. A futile impulse, since the massive door had already closed. The air inside felt wrong. Not just warmer than the killing cold outside, but somehow thicker, as if it carried more substance than normal atmosphere. Each breath came with effort, like inhaling water that didn't drown you. The smell was alien too, not the musty scent of long-abandoned places, but something sharper and more alive, like ozone mixed with wet stone and something else I couldn't identify. "Lightfoot," I called, my voice strangely muffled despite the cavernous space I sensed around me. The sound didn't echo as it should have, instead seeming to be absorbed by the walls themselves. No answer came, but as my vision adapted, I made out a path of that same purple-blue luminescence stretching ahead. The glow came from the floor itself, not electrical lighting, but something within the stone, pulsing gently in rhythm with the star Ularu outside. I switched on my headlamp, hoping for better visibility, but the beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet before being swallowed by the unnatural darkness. With no other option, I followed the glowing pathway deeper into the structure, moving cautiously over a surface that felt too smooth and slightly yielding underfoot, like walking on something partly organic. The path sloped gently downward, taking me deeper below the ice. After about 100 yards, it opened into a space so vast my headlamp couldn't reach the opposite wall or ceiling. The air shifted here, the pressure changing in my ears as if I'd descended far deeper than seemed possible in such a short distance. "Lightfoot!" I tried again, louder this time. "Here," came his reply from somewhere ahead, his voice altered by the strange acoustics of the chamber. I moved toward the sound, the glowing pathway branching into several directions across the floor of what I now realized was an enormous hall. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, supported by massive columns that defied normal architectural principles. They twisted upward in spiral patterns that hurt my eyes to follow, joining with the ceiling in ways that seemed to bend space itself. As I approached, I saw Lightfoot kneeling at the center of the vast space, cradling Eva in his arms. Her small body continued to emit that faint purple-blue glow, matching the light coming from the floor and walls. "Look at this place, Kane," Lightfoot said without turning, his voice filled with awe. "It's more incredible than I imagined." I stopped several feet away, taking in our surroundings. My headlamp illuminated only fragments of the space, but what I could see confirmed we stood inside something that couldn't possibly have been built by human hands. The walls, floors, and columns were made of a material that wasn't quite stone, darker than obsidian but with an inner luminosity that shifted as I moved, almost as if it were responding to our presence. The surfaces were covered in symbols identical to those Eva had drawn during her episodes. Complex patterns that seemed to move at the corner of my vision, rearranging themselves when not directly observed. "We shouldn't be here," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "This place isn't meant for us." "You're wrong," Lightfoot replied, finally looking up at me. His face was transformed by the strange light, shadows deepening the lines around his eyes and mouth. "It's been waiting for us, for her." He looked down at Eva's vacant face. "For thousands of years." I approached cautiously, kneeling beside them. Ava's condition appeared unchanged, eyes open but unseeing, body limp except for shallow breathing. The glow around her had intensified slightly, pulsing in rhythm with the light in the floor. "Lightfoot, look at her. Whatever this place is doing, it's not helping her." "You don't understand," he said, that dangerous certainty still in his voice. "The connection is establishing itself. It takes time." "Connection to what?" That thing that possessed the cat? The Starborn? He nodded, gently brushing Ava's hair from her face. The being that built this place, that's been reaching out to her for years. His hand trembled slightly. I didn't understand at first when her episodes began. I thought it was a medical condition, took her to specialists all over the world. But then I found Pedersen's journal, saw the drawings. The same symbols she drew during her seizures, I finished, looking at the walls around us. Yes, exactly the same. She was receiving messages, Kane, not suffering from illness. I chose my next words carefully, aware of his fragile state. But what if the connection itself is the illness? What if this entity is parasitic, using her somehow? Lightfoot's expression hardened. That's what the doctors said, that she was damaged, broken. But they were wrong. She's special, chosen. This being has gifts to offer, knowledge beyond our comprehension. Before I could respond, a new light appeared ahead of us, brighter, more focused. It emanated from a doorway that hadn't been visible moments before, an opening in the far wall that seemed to form itself as we watched. "It's opening for us," Lightfoot said, rising with Eva in his arms. "We're meant to go deeper." I grabbed his arm. "Wait, we don't know what's in there." "I have to try," he said simply. "For her." The desperation in his eyes was painful to see, the look of a father who would do anything, risk anything to save his child. I realized arguing was pointless. "Then I'm coming with you." He nodded, and together we approached the newly formed doorway. As we drew closer, I noticed the symbols on the walls around it were different from the others, more complex, arranged in patterns that suggested narrative rather than merely decorative elements. The doorway led to another corridor, this one wider and taller than the first. The walls here were covered in elaborate murals that glowed with that same inner light, illuminating our path. Unlike the abstract symbols we'd seen before, these images told a clear story, albeit one from a civilization utterly alien to our own. I slowed, studying the images as we passed. They depicted bipedal figures with elongated limbs and oversized heads, arranged in postures of worship around a central entity that made my skin crawl, a massive creature that combined feline and stellar elements in impossible ways. In one panel, it towered over a city of impossible architecture, its form radiating light that touched the supplicant figures below. In another, it appeared to be emerging from a great void in the night sky, descending to a planet that might have been Earth in some distant past. "My God," I whispered, recognizing the creature from the transformed cat we'd seen in camp. They worshipped it. "The Starborn," Lightfoot confirmed, his voice hushed with reverence. "An entity that came from beyond our universe, bringing knowledge and power." I continued studying the murals as we moved deeper. The story they told grew darker as we proceeded. The alien figures changed, their forms becoming distorted, limbs multiplying, their heads developing star-like patterns in place of normal features. The great cat-like entity loomed larger in each successive panel, consuming or transforming its worshippers in ways that looked more like torture than blessing. Further along, the murals showed conflict, some of the beings fighting against the changed ones, using weapons that emitted beams of light. The great entity watched from above, now depicted with multiple heads and limbs, its form no longer recognizably feline, but something more cosmic and terrible. "Lightfoot," I said quietly. "These don't look like images of a benevolent being. This looks like invasion, like parasitism." He barely glanced at the murals. "You're interpreting them through a human lens. These depictions are symbolic, not literal." The corridor eventually opened into another massive chamber, this one clearly designed for some ceremonial purpose. At its center stood a raised platform of the same dark, luminous material, surrounded by concentric circles of the glowing symbols. And dominating the far wall was a colossal mural that stopped me in my tracks. The image showed the star entity being contained, thousands of the alien figures using what appeared to be technology and ritual simultaneously to force the cosmic horror into a massive sarcophagus-like structure. Above them, a star that could only be Ularu blazed in a night sky filled with wrong constellations. "They imprisoned it," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "This whole structure is a prison." Lightfoot had reached the central platform and gently laid Eva down upon it. "No," he said, though I heard a hint of doubt in his voice for the first time. "It's a temple, a place of communion." I approached the platform cautiously, noting how the circles of symbols around it began to pulse more intensely as Eva's body made contact with the surface. Her own glow strengthened in response, the purple-blue light seeping from her skin to connect with the patterns on the platform. "They buried it," I insisted, pointing to the mural. "Look at their faces, Lightfoot. They're not worshipping. They're fighting for survival. Whatever this thing is, an ancient civilization thought it dangerous enough to trap it under hundreds of feet of ice." A soft sound drew my attention back to Eva. Her eyes remained vacant, but her mouth had begun to move, forming words without sound. Lightfoot leaned closer, his expression hopeful. "Eva? Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Her lips continued moving silently for several seconds before sound emerged. Not her voice, but that layered, impossible language we'd heard before. It echoed through the chamber, growing louder until it seemed to come from the walls themselves. The platform beneath her began to transform, the solid surface becoming partially liquid, forming a shallow depression that cradled her small body. The glow intensified around her, tendrils of light extending upward into the air. "What's happening?" I demanded, moving toward her, but Lightfoot blocked my path. "The connection is strengthening," he said, his eyes wide with mingled hope and fear. "This is what we came for." A tremor shook the chamber, dust and small fragments falling from the distant ceiling. I glanced back at the corridor we'd traversed, suddenly aware we might be trapped if the structure began to collapse. "Lightfoot, this place isn't stable. The whole ice sheet was fracturing outside. We need to get Eva and leave." He shook his head. "Not yet. It's almost ready." "Ready for what?" Another tremor, stronger than the first, sent us both staggering. The glowing symbols on the floor brightened suddenly, their light almost blinding. And from somewhere deep below, a sound rose. Part mechanical grinding, part biological pulse, as if something massive were stirring. The far wall of the chamber, the one bearing the mural of the entity's imprisonment, began to move. What I had taken for a solid surface was splitting down the middle, a massive doorway opening where none had been visible before. Beyond it lay darkness deeper than the void between stars. Eva's alien voice grew louder, more insistent, the words coming faster now. Her body had begun to rise from the platform, suspended in the air by those tendrils of light that continued to spread outward, connecting to the walls and floor in an expanding network. "Stop this," I pleaded, grabbing Lightfoot's shoulder. "Whatever's happening, it's not healing her. It's using her." For a moment, doubt crossed his face as he looked at his daughter floating above the platform, her small body barely visible now within the cocoon of light. Then his expression hardened again with renewed conviction. "No, this is the transformation Pedersen described. The healing comes after the communion." I was about to argue further when movement from the newly opened doorway caught my attention. Something was emerging from that impossible darkness, something that shifted and flowed like the transformed cat from our camp, but vastly larger. It had no fixed form, its shape constantly changing and flowing, but the suggestion of a massive feline head was briefly recognizable before dissolving into a pattern of eyes and limbs and star-like points. It moved like liquid yet maintained a physical presence that bent the light around it, creating shadows that fell at impossible angles. I backed away instinctively, pulling Lightfoot with me. "We need to leave. Now." but he stood transfixed, staring at the entity with an expression of awe. "The Starborn," he whispered, just as the journal described. The entity continued emerging, its size becoming apparent as it filled more of the massive chamber. It was colossal, the size of a small building, and still coming, its form rippling and pulsing with that same purple-blue light that now suffused everything around us. Eva's suspended body turned slowly in the air to face the approaching entity. The tendrils of light connected her directly to it now, pulsing with energy that flowed both ways, from her to it and back again. "You see?" Lightfoot said, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's connecting with her. This is what will save her." The entity paused about 30 feet from the platform, its ever-shifting form temporarily stabilizing into something vaguely star-shaped, with points extending outward that terminated in structures resembling heads, some feline, some more alien. At its center, a void opened, a darkness that somehow glowed with negative light. Ava's body was drawn toward that central void, the tendrils pulling her through the air. I lunged forward, trying to intercept her, but Lightfoot caught my arm. "Don't interfere," he hissed. "This is what's meant to happen." Another violent tremor shook the chamber, this one lasting longer. Cracks appeared in the ceiling and walls, the ancient structure groaning under stresses it was never designed to withstand. The ice above us was shifting, perhaps collapsing entirely. "This place is coming down," I shouted over the growing noise. "We'll be buried alive." Lightfoot ignored me, his attention fixed on Eva and the entity. Her small body had nearly reached the void at the creature's center, the glow around her pulsing in sync with the Starborn's own luminescence. Then, just before she made contact with the void, Ava's eyes suddenly cleared. The vacancy vanished, replaced by awareness and terror. She looked directly at Lightfoot, her mouth opening in a very human scream of fear. "Daddy, help me." The sound of her voice, her real voice, not the alien language, broke through Lightfoot's trance. His expression transformed, hope and certainty giving way to horror as he finally saw what was happening to his daughter. "Ava!" he screamed, breaking free from my grip and rushing toward the platform. I followed, both of us fighting against a sudden wind that swirled through the chamber, emanating from the entity itself. The Starborn's form began to shift more rapidly, its points extending toward us like probing tendrils. Lightfoot reached the edge of the platform first, leaping up to try to reach Ava as she hovered just feet from the void. One of the entity's tendrils lashed out, striking him across the chest and sending him flying backward. He hit the floor hard, sliding several feet before coming to a stop. I changed direction, going to him instead. He was conscious but dazed, a burn mark visible across his chest where the tendril had touched him. "We have to get her," he gasped, struggling to sit up. "It's not healing her, it's taking her." Another tremor, the most violent yet, shook the entire chamber. Large chunks of the ceiling began to fall, smashing into the floor around us. The entity seemed unaffected, continuing to draw Eva toward its center. "Daddy!" she screamed again, her voice weaker now, fighting against whatever force pulled her. The sound galvanized Lightfoot. He staggered to his feet, pushing past me to run back toward the platform. I followed, dodging falling debris as the ancient structure continued to disintegrate around us. The entity sensed our approach, more tendrils lashing out. I ducked under one, feeling the heat of its passage above my head. Lightfoot wasn't so lucky. Another tendril caught him square in the back, sending him sprawling once more. I kept moving, reaching the platform and leaping onto it. The surface shifted beneath my feet, partially liquid like quicksand. I sank to my ankles, the material hardening around my boots, holding me in place. Eva hovered just beyond my reach, now only feet from the void at the entity's center. Her eyes locked with mine, terrified but fully aware now. "Mr. Kane," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos around us. "Don't let it take me." I stretched my arm toward her, fingers straining. "Reach for me, Ava, as far as you can." She extended her small hand, fighting against the pull of the tendrils. Our fingers were inches apart when another section of ceiling collapsed, striking the platform and tilting it. The material around my boots suddenly liquefied again, throwing me off balance. Eva screamed as the tendrils yanked her backward toward the waiting void. I lunged forward, managing to grasp the sleeve of her Arctic gear. For a moment we hung there, connected by that tenuous grip, her body suspended between my pull and the entity's. Then her sleeve began to tear, the fabric separating under the opposing forces. I tried to grab her wrist instead, but another tremor shook the platform, throwing off my aim. "Hold on!" I shouted, fighting to regain my balance. The Starborn made a sound, not the chuckling noise of the cat in camp, but something vaster and more terrible, a vibration that resonated through the chamber and our bodies. More tendrils extended from its form, wrapping around Eva, pulling her with inexorable force. I looked back for Lightfoot, hoping he'd recovered enough to help. He was on his feet, staggering toward us across the unstable floor, his face contorted with fear for his daughter. Before he could reach us, the largest tremor yet struck. A massive section of ceiling collapsed between us, cutting him off from the platform. I heard his scream of denial even as I fought to maintain my grip on Eva. Her sleeve tore completely, the fabric coming away in my hand. She cried out as the tendrils pulled her the final distance toward the void. Just before she reached it, our eyes met one last time. What I saw there wasn't the vacant stare from before, or even the terror of moments ago, but something worse: recognition and understanding of what awaited her. Then she vanished into the void at the entity's center, swallowed by that negative light. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward as if I could follow her, but the platform beneath me had begun to collapse entirely, sections falling away into a newly formed abyss. I scrambled backward, barely making it to solid ground as the last of the platform disintegrated. The Starborn's form pulsed. I struggled across the fractured ice, fighting to put distance between myself and the collapsing structure. The terrain had become a maze of jagged crevasses, each step threatening to send me plummeting into darkness. The red glow behind me cast grotesque shadows, stretching my silhouette into something barely human as I fled. My headlamp provided the only reliable illumination, the beam cutting through swirling snow as the wind rose to a howl. I needed shelter. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and my exposure to the elements would become fatal within hours. The ridge I'd reached offered minimal protection, little more than a starting point for my desperate journey back towards civilization. What haunted me most wasn't the cold or isolation, but the echo of Ava's voice I'd heard within the cosmic entity's call. That small, terrified sound continued to ring in my ears, a human note within an inhuman chorus. I tried to focus on survival, on finding a path back to where Rodriguez and the others might be waiting, but my thoughts kept returning to the child and her father, trapped within that impossible structure. After nearly an hour of careful progress across treacherous terrain, I spotted something ahead, a dark shape against the white landscape, too regular to be natural. Drawing closer, I recognized one of our smaller equipment shelters, torn loose from the camp and carried here by whatever forces had transformed the ice field. It lay on its side, partially buried in snow, but appeared largely intact. I cleared the entrance and crawled inside, grateful for even this minimal shelter from the wind. The small space was empty, except for a single equipment case that had been bolted to what was now the wall. I forced it open, hoping for supplies, and found a survival pack with emergency rations, a thermal blanket, and, most valuable of all, a satellite phone. My hands shook as I tried to power it on, but nothing happened. The battery was dead, or perhaps whatever had disrupted our communications in camp still affected this area. I set it aside and wrapped the thermal blanket around myself, trying to conserve body heat while I considered my options. As exhaustion crept over me, my mind kept returning to the murals I'd seen inside the structure, the warning I'd recognized, but Lightfoot had ignored. With my eyes closed, the images seemed to float before me, more detailed than I remembered seeing them in person. Whether this was a symptom of extreme stress or something more sinister, I couldn't be sure. The murals told a story that unfolded across millennia. The first images showed the arrival of the Starborn, the cosmic entity depicted as a great cat descending from the void between stars. The civilization that received it was humanoid but not human, with elongated limbs and oversized heads, living in cities of impossible architecture. They had worshipped the entity at first, building temples and making offerings. The murals showed it bestowing gifts, knowledge, technology, power beyond their previous capabilities. Selected individuals underwent a transformation, developing abilities that seemed miraculous but came with physical changes, their bodies taking on aspects of their god, star patterns forming in their eyes, limbs elongating beyond natural proportions. Then the murals had shown the cost of these gifts. The transformed ones became agents of their deity, taking more volunteers for transformation, willingly at first, then by force. The Starborn's hunger grew, demanding more vessels, more connections to this reality. Children were particularly valued, their developing minds more receptive to the entity's influence. The murals showed rows of small figures, their hands glowing with that same purple-blue light I'd seen around Eva's. They were special ones, like her, bridges between worlds, keys to doors that should remain closed. The civilization had eventually rebelled, realizing too late what they had invited into their world. Their greatest minds developed a means to contain the Starborn, using both technology and ritual to create a prison that would hold it between realities. The final panels showed the entity being forced into its prison, sealed away beneath the ice of what must have been ancient Earth, while the star Ularu was somehow bound to serve as both lock and warning beacon. The murals had been clear. This was no benevolent god, but a cosmic parasite, consuming and transforming those it touched. The structure wasn't a temple, but a prison, designed to keep the entity trapped for eternity. Yet Lightfoot had seen something different in those same images. Where I saw warning, he saw invitation. Where I saw imprisonment, he saw communion. His desperate love for Ava had twisted his perception until he believed awakening this horror was the only way to save her. I must have drifted into uneasy sleep because I jolted awake to a strange sound outside the shelter, a soft padding like footsteps in the snow, too regular to be the wind. I held my breath, straining to listen. Something moved against the outer wall of the shelter, its weight causing the structure to shift slightly. Then came a familiar sound, that chuckling noise I'd heard from the transformed cat in our camp. "No," I whispered, pulling the thermal blanket tighter around myself as if it could offer protection. A shadow passed across the small gap in the shelter's doorway. I glimpsed a feline shape outside, larger than a normal cat, but not yet the fully transformed horror I'd seen before. It paused, as if sensing my presence within. I remained perfectly still, barely breathing. After what felt like hours, but must have been only minutes, the creature moved on, its padding footsteps fading into the distance. Once certain it was gone, I allowed myself to breathe normally again. This encounter confirmed my fears. The entity's influence was spreading, manifesting through these cat-like forms across the ice. I was still within its reach. I needed to move on, to put more distance between myself and what had emerged from beneath the ice. The thought of Eva and Lightfoot still trapped there twisted in my gut. But there was nothing I could do for them now. As I prepared to leave the shelter, a new sound caught my attention, not the padding of the cat creature, but something more mechanical. I peered out through the gap and saw a faint light in the distance, moving across the ice field. Hope surged through me. Perhaps Rodriguez and the others had returned with one of the vehicles, searching for survivors. I grabbed the satellite phone and emergency supplies, then crawled out of the shelter into the biting cold. The light was still visible, perhaps half a mile away, moving slowly in a search pattern. I turned on my headlamp and began waving it in wide arcs, hoping to catch their attention. After several minutes, the distant light changed direction, heading toward me. I moved to meet it, picking my way carefully across the broken ice. As it drew closer, I could make out the shape of one of our modified snow trucks, its powerful headlights cutting through the darkness. Relief flooded through me as I recognized Rodriguez behind the wheel, with Williams and Haswell beside him. They had survived the collapse and come back for me. The reunion was brief and tense. They had felt the massive tremors from miles away and witnessed the strange red light in the sky. When I asked about the others, Rodriguez shook his head grimly. Carver and Zhang had disappeared during their escape, wandering away from the vehicles in a trance-like state similar to what we'd seen with Peterson. They'd been forced to leave without them after searching for hours. "What about Lightfoot and the girl?" Williams asked as we headed away from the transformed landscape, back toward our planned extraction point. "Gone," I said simply, unable to explain what I'd witnessed. How could I describe Eva being absorbed into a cosmic entity, or Lightfoot running back into a collapsing structure in a desperate attempt to save her? Haswell, her medical training asserting itself even now, checked me for injuries and signs of hypothermia. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, wrapping another thermal blanket around my shoulders. "What happened in there, Kane?" I hesitated, uncertain how to explain what I'd seen. "It wasn't what Lightfoot thought," I finally said. "The structure, the entity beneath the ice, it wasn't there to help Eva. It was using her." "Using her for what?" Rodriguez asked, keeping his eyes on the treacherous path ahead. "As a door," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "A way back into our world." The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. None of them pressed for details, perhaps afraid of the answers I might give. As we traveled, the memories of what I'd seen inside the structure continued to surface, becoming clearer despite my efforts to suppress them. The images from the murals especially haunted me, the ancient civilization that had first welcomed and then imprisoned the Starborn. I found myself describing them to the others, almost compulsively, as if sharing the burden might somehow lighten it. "They worshipped it at first," I explained, staring out at the darkness beyond our headlights. "Built temples, made offerings. It gave them knowledge, power, technology beyond what they'd had before, but it demanded a price." "What kind of price?" Williams asked quietly. "Vessels, bodies. It couldn't fully exist in our reality without them. It needed connections, people who could serve as anchors, bridges between its dimension and ours." Haswell's medical mind focused on the practical implications. "Like Eva, with her seizures and episodes?" I nodded. The murals showed children like her, special ones with a natural connection to whatever dimension the entity came from. It could reach them even when it was imprisoned, influence them from across the barrier. "So Lightfoot was right about one thing," Rodriguez said grimly. "Eva's condition wasn't just medical, it was something else." "Yes, but he misunderstood what it meant. He thought the entity would heal her, restore her to normalcy. What it really wanted was to complete the connection, turn her from a temporary bridge into a permanent door." The snow truck hit a particularly rough patch of ice, jolting us all. Rodriguez slowed our pace, navigating carefully through the increasingly unstable terrain. "You said the civilization eventually fought back," Williams prompted, bringing the conversation back to the murals. "They realized too late what they'd invited in. The entity's hunger grew. The transformed ones, those who had accepted its gifts, began taking others by force for conversion. Their entire society was being consumed from within." I described the final panels of the mural sequence, how their greatest minds had developed the means to trap the Starborn, using both advanced technology and ritual practices to create a prison between dimensions. "The structure we found wasn't a temple," I concluded. "It was a cage, designed to keep that thing locked away forever." "But now it's free," Haswell said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to confirm what we all knew, that something ancient and terrible had been released into our world. As dawn approached, the satellite phone suddenly chirped to life in my pocket. Whatever had been blocking communications was weakening with distance. Rodriguez pulled the vehicle to a stop as I answered the call. It was our extraction team from Nuuk, concerned after days of lost contact. I gave them our coordinates and a brief, sanitized version of events: a seismic event, structural collapse, lost team members. Nothing about cosmic entities or impossible architecture. They promised to send a rescue helicopter as soon as weather permitted. With contact established and help on the way, we should have felt relief. Instead, a heavy silence filled the vehicle. Each of us knew we were carrying something back from that ice field that would never allow us to return to normal lives. "What do we tell them?" Williams finally asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "About what really happened?" "Nothing they'd believe," I said truthfully. "Nothing that wouldn't get us locked up for psychiatric evaluation." "So we lie?" Haswell didn't sound judgmental, merely pragmatic. "We stick to the facts they can verify: seismic activity, structural collapse, lost team members." I looked at each of them in turn. "Beyond that, it's up to each of you what you share." The conversation died as we continued our journey, each lost in private thoughts. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern horizon, I found myself wondering about Lightfoot, what he had found deeper within the structure, whether he had reached Ava before the end. Despite everything, a part of me hoped he had. A father's love, even misguided, deserved better than failure. When the red-tinged sun finally broke over the horizon, the light seemed to trigger something in my exhausted brain. I slipped into a half-dream state, my mind conjuring nightmarish scenarios of what might have happened after I fled. I imagined Lightfoot running through collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris as he made his way deeper into the structure, desperately searching for Ava after she had been absorbed by the entity. In this waking nightmare, I pictured him finding the ceremonial chamber where I'd last seen them, now transformed into something even more alien and terrible. The images were vivid, but fragmented. Lightfoot calling Ava's name into a swirling vortex of energy, the entity responding with Ava's voice, but twisted into something inhuman, the desperate father refusing to accept what had happened to his daughter. I jolted back to full consciousness, my heart racing. These weren't visions of actual events, just my traumatized mind trying to process what I'd witnessed, creating scenarios to fill the gaps in my knowledge. I had no way of knowing what truly happened after I escaped. "You okay?" Rodriguez asked, glancing at me with concern. "Just tired," I replied, rubbing my eyes, "and seeing things that aren't there." The murals I had seen told only one story, a warning about an ancient horror that should never have been disturbed. There was no alternate interpretation, no hidden invitation. Only Lightfoot, in his desperate love for Eva, had twisted their meaning to serve his hopes. He had made the very choice the murals had warned against, trading wisdom for love, caution for hope, the greater good for personal salvation. It was the same choice the ancient civilization had made before him, with consequences that had required a prison of impossible architecture to contain. Now that prison lay broken beneath the ice, its occupant freed after millennia of confinement. And somewhere within its alien consciousness resided the essence of a 9-year-old girl, and the father who had loved her enough to sacrifice everything, including perhaps his very humanity, to save her. As our vehicle crested a ridge, I looked back one last time at the distant horizon where the structure had been. The red glow had faded, replaced by ordinary daylight. There was no visible sign of the cosmic horror we had awakened, no indication that anything had changed. But I knew better. We all did. The helicopter that would take us back to civilization was already visible in the distance, a small dark shape against the pale sky. Soon we would return to a world of rational explanations and scientific certainty, where tales of cosmic entities and impossible architecture belonged only in fiction. Yet the murals I had seen would stay with me forever, their warning, their history, their terrible truth about what lay beneath the ice. And in quiet moments, when the memory surfaced, I would wonder about Lightfoot and Eva, Whether they had found what they sought in that alien realm, whether love had proven stronger than cosmic horror, whether a father's desperate choice had saved his daughter or doomed us all. Some questions have no answers. Some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. I couldn't leave them behind. The thought hit me as I stood on the ridge looking back at the red-stained ruins. Ava was still alive. I'd heard her voice within that cosmic chorus, and leaving her to whatever fate awaited her was something I couldn't live with, even if it meant going back into that nightmare. I turned away from escape and trudged back toward the collapsed structure. The sky above pulsed with that blood-red light, casting everything in a crimson glow that made the ice look like a slaughterhouse floor. The wind had picked up, carrying particles of snow and ice that stung my exposed face. Logic screamed against what I was doing. The sensible choice was to keep moving, to find Rodriguez and the others, to get back to civilization and try to forget what I'd seen. But the memory of Ava's small face twisted with terror as she'd been pulled toward that void wouldn't let me. I'd promised her father I'd keep her safe. As I approached the ruins, I noticed something strange. The collapsed entrance I'd fled through earlier had changed. Where there had been only rubble and broken ice, a new opening had formed, as if the structure itself had rearranged to create a path back inside. It wasn't the same doorway, but rather a jagged tear in the outer wall that glowed with that same red light that stained the sky. I stopped at the threshold, my breath coming in white clouds. Going back in was probably suicide. But staying outside in these temperatures with night approaching would be certain death anyway. The new passage sloped steeply downward, taking me deeper than my original path through the structure. The walls here were covered in different symbols from what I'd seen before, more frantic, jagged patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The air grew thicker and warmer as I descended, carrying that same wet fur smell I'd noticed around the transformed cat. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the passage opened into a vast chamber I hadn't seen before. Unlike the ceremonial space where Ava had been taken, this room was circular, with a domed ceiling that soared hundreds of feet above. The walls were lined with what looked like containment cells, small chambers with transparent fronts that revealed only darkness beyond. At the center of the room stood a massive object that could only be the sarcophagus. It was roughly oval in shape, about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, made of that same black material that had built the rest of the structure, but with a polished, glossy surface that reflected the red light. Strange protrusions extended from its sides like fins, or perhaps handles, twisting upward in shapes that hurt my eyes to follow, and kneeling before it, his hands pressed against its surface, was Lightfoot. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "Lightfoot, get away from that thing." He turned slowly, and I nearly stepped back at the sight of his face. His eyes had changed, the whites now shot through with red filaments, the irises expanded to consume almost the entire visible surface. His skin had a waxy pallor, and thin trails of what looked like blood had dried from his nose and ears. "Kane," he said, his voice oddly calm, "you came back." I moved closer, careful to keep my distance from both him and the sarcophagus. "Where's Eva?" He gestured toward the sarcophagus with a trembling hand. "Inside. With it. They're together now." Cold dread washed over me. "What do you mean, inside? Lightfoot, what have you done?" "I didn't do it," he said, rising unsteadily to his feet. "The entity did. It took her into itself when it emerged in the upper chamber. But this..." He placed his hand back on the sarcophagus. "This is where its true form rests. The part we saw was just an extension, a probe into our world. The real power, the true Starborn, is still contained here." A tremor shook the chamber, dust and small fragments falling from the ceiling. The structure was becoming increasingly unstable. "We need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The whole place is coming down." Lightfoot shook his head, a fanatic's certainty in his bloodshot eyes. "I can't leave her. I won't leave her. She's gone, Lightfoot. Whatever happened to Eva?" "She's not gone," he snapped, suddenly animated. "She's in transition. The entity is preparing her. If I open this final seal, the transformation will complete. She'll come back to me, whole and healed." Another, stronger tremor shook the chamber. A crack appeared along one wall, spreading rapidly toward the ceiling. "Listen to me," I said, taking another step toward him. "Those murals we saw, they weren't showing worship or healing. They were showing imprisonment. This thing, whatever it is, was sealed away for a reason. Opening that sarcophagus will only make things worse." Lightfoot laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. "Worse than losing my daughter? There is nothing worse than that, Kane. Nothing I wouldn't do to get her back." He turned back to the sarcophagus and placed both hands against its surface. The red light pulsed brighter, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a seam running around the perimeter of the oval shape, barely visible but definitely there. The sarcophagus could be opened. "Don't," I pleaded, real fear in my voice now. "Please, Lightfoot, think about what you're doing." But he wasn't listening. His hands were moving across the surface of the sarcophagus, finding indentations or controls I couldn't see. The light pulsed faster, in rhythm with movements I couldn't track. I lunged forward, intending to pull him away, but another violent tremor threw me off balance. I fell to one knee as the entire chamber shuddered. When I looked up, Lightfoot had somehow activated something. The seam around the sarcophagus was now glowing with intense white light, a stark contrast to the red that bathed everything else. "Yes," Lightfoot whispered, his voice filled with terrible hope. "Open. Give her back to me." With a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake, the seam widened. The top half of the sarcophagus began to rise slowly, revealing darkness within. Not just absence of light, but something deeper and more fundamental, a void that seemed to pull at my vision. "Lightfoot, stop this!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. Too late. The sarcophagus lid rose further, and from within came a light so intense it left purple afterimages burned into my retinas. I shielded my eyes with one arm, still trying to reach Lightfoot with the other. What happened next came in fragments, my senses overwhelmed by input they weren't designed to process. Light erupted from the fully open sarcophagus, not the red light from before or the white of the seam, but something beyond the visible spectrum, colors I had no names for pulsing in patterns that triggered nausea and disorientation. Lightfoot stood with his arms outstretched, welcoming whatever emerged. His body began to change before my eyes, his outline becoming blurred, his form seeming to stretch and compress simultaneously in ways that defied physical laws. "Ava," he called, his voice distorted. "Ava, I'm here." From within the sarcophagus rose something that wasn't Eva, wasn't human, wasn't anything I could comprehend. It had mass and presence, but no fixed shape. A flowing, pulsing arrangement of light and dark that constantly rearranged itself. Where it touched the air, reality seemed to bend and distort. The chamber shook more violently, huge chunks of ceiling now crashing down around us. The walls were buckling, the whole structure seeming to fold in on itself as the thing from the sarcophagus continued to emerge. And then, amid the chaos and cosmic horror, I saw her. Ava, or what remained of her. A small human form suspended within the emerging entity, like a fly trapped in amber. Her eyes were open but vacant, her body limp, surrounded by threads of that strange light that connected her to the larger mass. "Ava!" I shouted, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. But something heard. The entity paused in its emergence, part of its amorphous form twisting toward me. I felt a presence brush against my mind, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. It regarded me with what might have been curiosity, like a human noticing an ant on their path. In that moment of its distraction, I saw Ava's eyes focus. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the noise of the collapsing structure, but I could read them clearly enough. "Help me." I didn't think. I moved, rushing toward her despite the danger. Lightfoot stood between us, his body now barely recognizable as human, stretched and distorted, his features running like wax in a fire, still calling Eva's name in a voice that kept changing pitch and timbre. Another piece of ceiling crashed down mere feet from me. The floor beneath my feet was cracking, sections falling away into some bottomless depth below. I had seconds at most before the whole chamber collapsed. I lunged past Lightfoot, or through him, his form no longer seemed entirely solid, and reached for Eva. My hands closed around something solid, her small arm, and I pulled. There was resistance, those threads of light pulling back, trying to keep her within the entity's mass. "Let go," I screamed, not at Eva, but at the thing that held her. "She's not yours." Whether it understood or simply reacted to the physical intrusion, the entity pulsed once, violently, and Eva suddenly came free. The momentum threw me backward. Ava's small form clutched against my chest as we both fell to the crumbling floor. Lightfoot's distorted shape turned toward us, his face barely recognizable except for his eyes, which remained horribly human despite everything else. "Ava," he said, his voice no longer just his own, but layered with other sounds. "Stay. Be whole." Ava stirred against me, her first voluntary movement since I'd found her. She looked at what her father had become and made a small, broken sound that might have been, "Daddy." Lightfoot reached for her with an arm that stretched impossibly, his fingers elongating into something like tendrils. "Come back," he said. "We'll be together. Forever." I pulled Eva away, backing toward the entrance I'd used. "She doesn't belong here," I told him. "Neither of us do. Come with us, Lightfoot. We can still get out." For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his distorted features. His arm retracted slightly, the tendrils recoiling. "Kane," he said, his voice briefly his own again. "Take her. Go." The entity seemed to sense his hesitation. It pulsed again, and Lightfoot's form was yanked backward, almost absorbed into its mass. He cried out, a sound of both pain and ecstasy. "Go now," he shouted, his voice once again layered with others. "I can't hold it back." I didn't need to be told twice. With Ava clutched tightly against me, I turned and ran for the passage, leaping over widening cracks in the floor, ducking as more debris fell from above. Behind me, I heard Lightfoot cry out one last time, my name, then Eva's, then nothing recognizable as human speech. The passage seemed to have shortened somehow, or maybe my fear lent me speed I didn't know I possessed. Eva was completely limp in my arms, but I could feel her breathing against my chest, her heart beating rapidly. We emerged onto the ice field as the entire structure behind us gave a great groan of stressed material. The entrance collapsed seconds after we cleared it, a cloud of dust and pulverized ice billowing outward. I kept running, or staggering really, as far from the collapsing structure as my strength would allow. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, we were maybe 200 yards away, on slightly higher ground. Eva stirred in my arms, her eyes fluttering open. "Mr. Kane," she whispered, her voice small but clear. "I'm here," I said, setting her down gently but keeping a supporting arm around her shoulders. "You're safe now." She looked past me, back toward where the structure was imploding in on itself, massive sections falling inward as if being pulled toward a central point. The red light still pulsed from within, but it was dimmer now, more contained. "Daddy?" she asked, though I think she already knew the answer. I couldn't lie to her. "He stayed behind. He tried to save you." Tears filled her eyes, cutting clean tracks down her dirt-smudged face. "He thought he was helping me." "I know," I said, because what else could I say? That her father's love had been twisted into obsession? That he had sacrificed himself to a cosmic horror in his desperation to cure her? None of that would help her now. The ground beneath us trembled continuously, the ice field fracturing in every direction as the ancient structure's collapse accelerated. Soon, there would be nothing left but a massive crater in the ice. "We need to move," I told her gently. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she swayed slightly when she tried to stand on her own. I kept my arm around her shoulders, steadying her as we began to move away from the destruction behind us. "It's still in me," Eva said after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. "Part of it. I can feel it." I looked down at her, alarmed. Her eyes seemed normal again, no vacant stare, no alien presence behind them. But her hands still had a faint purple glow about them, visible even in the red-tinged daylight. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked at her hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. "It wanted all of me, but Daddy stopped it. He pulled some of it into himself instead." Her voice broke slightly. "He knew what would happen." I didn't know what to say to that. Had Lightfoot's final act been one of sacrifice rather than obsession? Had he somehow traded himself for his daughter in those final moments? A particularly violent tremor shook the ice beneath us, nearly sending us both sprawling. When I looked back, the structure had completely vanished, leaving a perfect circular crater in the ice that was rapidly filling with swirling snow as the wind picked up. "It's not over," Eva whispered, staring at the crater. "It's just sleeping again. Daddy's with it now." I tightened my arm around her shoulders, both to support her and to reassure myself that she was really there, really human, really safe. "Let's find somewhere more stable to rest," I said. "Then we'll figure out how to get back to civilization." She nodded, still staring at the crater. "Mr. Kane, promise you won't leave me." "I promise," I said, meaning it completely. We continued across the fractured ice field, each step taking us further from the cosmic horror that had claimed Lightfoot and the ancient prison that had failed to contain it. Behind us, the red light in the sky gradually faded, returning to normal blue as if nothing unusual had happened. But Eva's hands still glowed faintly, and in quiet moments as we walked, I could have sworn I heard Lightfoot's voice on the Arctic wind, calling his daughter's name. I awoke to the steady beep of medical equipment and the gentle rocking motion that told me I was on water, not land. White ceiling, white walls, the antiseptic smell of a hospital. My body felt leaden, arms punctured with IV lines. The dull throb behind my eyes suggested heavy sedation. "Mr. Kane, can you hear me?" A woman in a Navy uniform leaned over me, her face professionally concerned but emotionally distant. The patches on her shoulder marked her as Danish military medical staff. "Where am I?" My voice came out as a croak, my throat raw as if I'd been screaming. "You're aboard the HDMS Absalon, a Danish naval vessel. You're safe now." She adjusted something on my IV drip. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. We need to ask you some questions about what happened." 3 days. The fragments of memory crashed back, the collapsing structure, the entity, Eva's small body in my arms as we escaped across the fractured ice. I tried to sit up. "Eva, where is she?" "The girl who was with me." The doctor exchanged glances with someone outside my field of vision. A man stepped forward, tall, lean, with the precise movements of government authority. "Mr. Kane, I'm Agent Larson with the Danish Polar Research Authority. You were found alone, nearly dead from exposure, 47 miles from your last reported camp location. There was no girl with you." "That's impossible. I had her. I got her out." My words tumbled out faster than my mind could order them. Lightfoot stayed behind, but Eva was with me. "Check the hospital. Maybe they separated us when—" "Mr. Kane." Larson's tone was flat. "We found you alone. There was no one else. No sign of the Lightfoot expedition, the equipment, the vehicles. Nothing." I stared at him, unable to process his words. "That's not possible. There were 9 of us. 3 modified snow trucks, habitat domes, drilling equipment. Nothing was found except you, wandering the ice, severely hypothermic and delirious." I struggled against the fog in my head. The medication made it difficult to think clearly, to string together the sequence of events that had led me here. After escaping the structure with Ava, what? My mind hit a blank wall. The others, Rodriguez, Williams, Haswell, they got away in one of the vehicles. They should have made it back to Nuuk. Larson shook his head. No expedition members returned to Nuuk. No communications were received after your initial check-in 5 days after departure. When the regular check-in was missed, search teams were dispatched. That's not what happened. I tried again to sit up, fighting against my body's weakness. Look, I need to speak to someone from the Greenland Research Institute. Call Lars Pedersen. He knows about the region, about the anomalies there. We've spoken with all relevant research personnel. There are no documented anomalies in that region. The area has been thoroughly mapped and studied. The doctor pressed me gently back against the pillow. Mr. Kane, you were exposed to extreme conditions. Your core temperature was dangerously low when we found you. Hypothermia of that severity can cause hallucinations, confusion, memory distortions. I know what hypothermia does, I snapped. I've spent 23 years in Arctic conditions. This wasn't hypothermia. What I saw was real. Larson pulled a chair closer to my bed and sat down. His expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. We found your journal in your pocket. The entries become increasingly fantastical. Black cats with stars in their eyes, structures that shouldn't exist, a cosmic entity beneath the ice. He paused. These are classic manifestations of hypothermic delirium. My journal. I'd forgotten about it. The small waterproof notebook I always carried on expeditions. I didn't remember writing in it after we discovered the structure. Let me see it. Larson hesitated, then passed me a plastic evidence bag containing my battered journal. I flipped it open with unsteady fingers. The early entries were normal, equipment checks, weather notes, team observations, but the later pages contained frantic scribbles, diagrams of impossible geometries, and crude drawings of what could only be the entity from beneath the ice. The handwriting was mine, but the content, I had no memory of writing any of it. This doesn't prove anything, I said, though doubt had begun to creep in. Someone could have written this while I was unconscious. For what purpose, Mr. Kane? Larson asked quietly. I had no answer for that. Your employer, Mr. Lightfoot, doesn't exist, at least not as you've described him. Larson continued methodically. We've found no record of a research expedition funded by anyone matching that description. No permits were filed. No equipment was rented or purchased. The coordinates you listed in your journal lead to a completely uninhabited region with no unusual features. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's not possible. I met him at his ranch in Montana. I spoke with his daughter. We flew to Newark on his private jet. There is a Robert Lightfoot who matches some aspects of your description, Larson acknowledged. A wealthy businessman with interests in Arctic research. But he died 3 years ago in a private plane crash over northern Canada. He had no children. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself against the rising tide of doubt and confusion. Call Lars at the Greenland Survey Office. He told me about the anomalies in that region, the classified incidents. We did speak with Lars Christensen at the survey office, Larson said. He has no recollection of such a conversation with you. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor, now increasing its pace as my pulse quickened. When can I leave? I finally asked. You're still recovering from severe exposure. Another day or two for observation, at least. The doctor checked my vitals. Your physical recovery is proceeding well, but we're concerned about your psychological state. I'm not crazy, I said, the words sounding hollow even to me. No one is suggesting that, she replied, too quickly. Traumatic experiences, combined with environmental extremes, can create vivid false memories. The mind tries to make sense of fragments, to create a coherent narrative. I know what I saw, I insisted, though the certainty I'd felt was beginning to fracture. Over the next 2 days, I was visited by various officials, military, scientific, governmental. Each brought the same message in different words. There was no evidence of anything I claimed had happened. No structure beneath the ice, no missing expedition team, no 9-year-old girl with inexplicable seizures. They showed me satellite imagery of the area where I claimed the structure had been. Nothing but pristine ice fields, untouched by human presence. Desperate, I demanded to speak with Lightfoot's family, certain they could confirm at least part of my story. Larson informed me that Robert Lightfoot's only living relative, his brother, had declined any contact with me after being briefed on my delusions. On the 3rd day, a psychiatrist evaluated me. He was kinder than the others, listening without interruption to my account of what had happened. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. The mind is remarkably resilient, Mr. Kane. When faced with trauma or extreme stress, it can create elaborate protective narratives. This wasn't a narrative, I insisted. I touched that structure. I felt its warmth. I saw the murals on the walls. Perhaps, he said carefully, what you experienced was a blending of reality and fiction. Your biographical information indicates you lost your own daughter 15 years ago. She would have been about Eva's age now, correct? The question hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, Sarah. The car accident that had taken her and her mother, driving me into the isolation of Arctic work, where human connections were temporary by design. This has nothing to do with Sarah, I said coldly. The mind makes connections we aren't conscious of, Mr. Kane. A lost child, a desperate father willing to do anything to save her. These are powerful emotional templates. I turned away from him, unwilling to continue the conversation. He left shortly after, recommending extended psychological support and medication that I had no intention of taking. The next day, I was discharged with a clean bill of physical health and strong recommendations for psychiatric follow-up. The Danish authorities provided transport back to Nuuk, where I was given temporary accommodations while arrangements were made for my return to the United States. Alone in the sparse government housing, I spread the contents of my expedition pack across the bed. Everything personal had been returned to me. My journal, my satellite phone, my camera. I scrolled through the photos on the digital camera, hoping for evidence of what I'd seen. There were images of Nuuk, of equipment preparation, of the team boarding the vehicles, but nothing after our departure from the settlement. No photos of the structure, the transformed landscape, the entity, just blank memory card space where those critical days should have been. The satellite phone showed no call records, though I distinctly remembered contacting Lars before the expedition. The journal remained my only tangible connection to the experience, filled with increasingly disturbed writings in my own hand. I sat by the window, watching Greenland's long twilight settle over Nuuk's harbor. Without proof, without witnesses, my account would remain officially classified as the hallucinations of a man who nearly died alone on the ice. The official report would cite equipment failure, navigational error, and extreme weather as factors in my near-death experience. Yet I knew. The weight of truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to dislodge despite the growing seed of doubt planted by day after day of rational explanations and sympathetic dismissals. That night, unable to sleep, I walked the quiet streets of Nuuk. The northern lights rippled across the sky, green and blue aurora, perfectly normal, nothing like the red-stained sky above the entity's emergence. I found myself at the harbor, staring out at the dark water where icebergs drifted like ghost ships. A movement caught my eye, a small black shape moving along the dock with feline grace. My heart stopped, then raced as I moved toward it. Just an ordinary harbor cat, I told myself. Nothing unusual, nothing supernatural. But when it turned toward me, its eyes caught the light strangely, reflecting something that wasn't there. Pinpricks of light like distant stars. It watched me for a long moment, then slipped between stacked shipping containers and vanished. My hands were trembling as I returned to my temporary quarters. Sleep eluded me as I paced the small room. torn between the evidence of reality presented by others and the certainty of my own experience. In the morning, I contacted a commercial air service and booked passage to Ilulissat, the northern settlement closest to where I believed the expedition had gone. The clerk at the counter looked at me curiously when I requested the flight. "Tourism season is over," she said. "Nothing much up there now." "I'm not a tourist," I replied. "I'm continuing research work." She shrugged and processed my ticket. In Ilulissat, I spent 3 days trying to arrange transport further north. No one would take me. The weather was worsening, they said. The ice conditions were dangerous. Come back in spring when conditions improved. I found a small guest house willing to rent me a room by the week and set up base there. Each day, I made inquiries about equipment, transport, guides, anything that might help me return to the site. Each day, I met with refusals, concerns, and occasionally pity. One evening, sitting alone in a small bar frequented by locals, I overheard 2 Greenlandic hunters speaking in their native language. My Greenlandic was limited, but I caught something about strange lights in the northern sky, animals behaving oddly, and old stories awakening. I approached them, buying a round of drinks to ease the conversation. "I heard you talking about lights in the north," I said carefully. "What kind of lights?" The older hunter studied me suspiciously. "Not aurora, different. Red. Only at night. Only for a few moments." "When did you see this?" He conferred briefly with his companion in rapid Greenlandic before answering. 3 weeks ago, while hunting, far north of here." My heart pounded. The timing matched when the entity had emerged. "Did you see anything else unusual? Animals acting strangely?" The younger hunter leaned forward. "Cats. Many cats. Where there should be no cats." "Black cats?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. They exchanged glances. The older hunter made a sign with his fingers that I recognized as a traditional ward against evil. "Why do you ask these things?" he demanded. "Because I saw them too," I said simply. The conversation ended abruptly. They finished their drinks and left without another word, leaving me alone with the first external validation I'd found for my experience. The next morning, I received a call from the American consulate. My presence was requested immediately regarding my continued activities in Greenland. I considered ignoring the summons, but realized it would only complicate my efforts to return to the site. The consular official was a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude and the bearing of someone with intelligence connections. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Kane, you need to stop. Now." "Stop what, exactly?" "Asking questions about phenomena that don't exist. Trying to arrange unauthorized expeditions into restricted areas, creating disturbances among the local population." I leaned back in my chair. "So there are restricted areas. Interesting." Her expression hardened. "Your visa status is currently under review. The Danish government has expressed concerns about your activities. If you continue, you will be deported and barred from re-entering Greenland." "On what grounds?" "Mental health concerns, national security. Take your pick." She pushed a folder across the desk. "These are your travel documents. A flight has been arranged for tomorrow morning to Copenhagen, connecting to New York. I strongly suggest you be on it." I left the consulate with the travel documents crumpled in my pocket. They were coordinating to remove me, to silence what I knew. It was further confirmation that something real had happened, something they wanted buried. That night, I received an unexpected visitor at the guest house, a young Danish woman who introduced herself only as Maria, claiming to work for a scientific institute in Copenhagen. She sat awkwardly on the edge of the chair in my small room, nervously checking her phone. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "But I saw your name on a security report. You were asking about anomalies in the northeastern region." I studied her carefully, looking for signs of a trap. "Yes, I experienced something there that officials are now denying." She nodded. "There have been others, not many. 3 that I know of in the past decade, all dismissed as hallucinations, exposure, mental breakdown. But you know different. I know the data doesn't match the official explanations. She glanced at her phone again. Magnetic anomalies, atmospheric disturbances, radiation patterns that don't correspond to any known natural phenomenon. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first to come back with such a detailed account, and because, she hesitated, because my father was Lars Christensen at the survey office, the one you tried to contact. They told me he had no recollection of our conversation. He died 2 weeks ago. Heart attack, they said. Her voice wavered slightly. The day after he pulled classified files about that region. Files he wasn't supposed to know existed. A chill ran through me. I'm sorry about your father. She nodded, then reached into her bag and withdrew a small USB drive. This contains everything he managed to download before he died. Expedition reports going back to the 1880s. Pedersen's original journal entries, not the sanitized version in the archives. Satellite imagery with unexplained discrepancies. I took the drive, suddenly aware of its potentially deadly value. Why give this to me? Why risk it? Because my father believed you. He left notes about your call, and because I need to know what happened to him. She stood. I've arranged a boat that will take you as far north as the pack ice allows. The captain owes my father a favor. He'll be at the North Dock tomorrow at 5 in the morning. The consulate has arranged a flight for me. If I don't show up, you'll have a day, maybe 2, before they come looking. Make it count. She moved to the door. Find proof, Mr. Kane. Real proof, not just stories. After she left, I sat staring at the USB drive in my hand. Proof existed. Records existed. I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. I spent the night copying Maria's files to multiple locations, online storage, emails to myself through anonymous accounts, even printing key documents at an all-night copy shop. By morning, I had distributed the evidence widely enough that it couldn't be easily erased. The fishing boat was exactly where Maria had said it would be. The captain, an older Inuit man with weathered features, nodded silently when I approached. No names were exchanged, no destinations discussed. He simply pointed to a space among the equipment where I could store my hastily purchased supplies. As we pulled away from Ilulissat in the pre-dawn darkness, I watched the lights of civilization recede. Whatever awaited me in the north, proof, vindication, or perhaps a more final silencing, I was committed now. The truth about what lay beneath the Arctic ice demanded to be known. The waters grew rougher as we headed north, massive icebergs passing like sentinels. I huddled in my cold weather gear, reviewing Maria's files on a rugged laptop I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Pedersen's original journal entries were far more disturbing than the version Lightfoot had shown me. The Danish explorer had documented not just the structure and its effects, but the aftermath. How members of his team had continued to experience manifestations of the entity weeks after their return to civilization. How they had been systematically discredited, institutionalized, or had died under mysterious circumstances. Satellite imagery showed periodic disturbances in the ice sheet, patterns of fracturing and refreezing that followed no natural cycle. And most chilling, reports of missing persons in the region going back centuries, always dismissed as accidents, exposure, or poor preparation. The pattern was clear. Something ancient and powerful lay beneath the ice. Something that occasionally reached out to touch our world. Something that various authorities had worked to keep hidden. As night fell, I stood on the deck watching the horizon. The captain approached, breaking his day-long silence. "Bad place," he said simply, pointing north. "Old stories, things that watch from underneath." "You know what's there?" He shook his head. "Not know. Feel." Grandparents told stories. Hungry gods sleeping under ice. "I've seen them," I said. "I need proof they exist." He studied me with ancient eyes. "Proof for who?"